Hey everybody, this is me from the future who just recorded the video you're about to watch. I just want to put this little thing in the beginning to kind of talk about the fact that this is a very rambly video. I do go on a kind of pretty long tangent about things, so just be aware of that. I did go in with a plan, and I very quickly devolved away from that plan. But I do still want to kind of, generally speaking, highlight the things that I talked about. And so I definitely recommend leaving some comments if you have questions or just a topic you want to talk about or something you're confused about that I said. It's a long ramble kind of thing, but I just want to put this in the front just to warn you in advance that this video might get a little confusing to listen to, and I apologize if that's the case. But let's throw it back to me from the past who has not yet realized what he has done. Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about free agency for the 2022 offseason or 2023 season, because we've seen a lot of stuff in terms of free agency, teams releasing players. We've already seen some trades and whatnot. And I think a lot of it is kind of surprising when you look at, but there's a lot of things that to me are not that big of a surprise when you really kind of break everything down and take a step back and consider things. Yes, there have already been teams that have made signings. We've had stuff that people have come out and said stuff that at the beginning of free agency that wasn't really a thing. But I've also never really been that concerned about things. And I'll talk about some examples for why that is as we kind of go. But I just kind of want to take some time and talk about really the free agency period that we have, what to make of it, and why I think that people shouldn't panic that much about what we have seen. So let's start with like the big thing, which is the fact that it seems like pretty much every single team is blowing up their roster. There's a few teams here and there that have kept a decent chunk of their roster, but most teams made sweeping changes to their team this offseason, releasing almost all of their roster, if not their entire roster. Teams like Dallas, who are a special case, where Hastro came out and said that the reason why they are doing that is because this team is kind of a unit and they kind of are a group of players who have kind of played together for a long time. And so we felt like it was the kind of best thing to do is to give them the opportunity to search for opportunities themselves as a group instead of kind of doing, some players, we re-sign, some we don't. Give it the opportunity that they can build the roster that they want. And those players can go wherever they choose to go, right? So that's the thing. Then you have a team like New York that, of course, blew up their roster. They didn't have a good season last season. Vancouver blew up their roster. The LA Valiant blew up their roster. So we're seeing most of the teams that blew up their rosters are teams that either didn't perform well or have a reason to do so, whether it be, a lot of contracts coming up or retirements, whatever it is. And even some stuff like what we have with the Shanghai Dragons where they presumably wanted to build around Izayaki, Lip, and Lee Jae-gon, but with the news about NetEase not renewing their deal with Activision Blizzard, NetEase owns the Shanghai Dragons, there's a lot of uncertainty around the APAC region. It's not that surprising that you have a team like Shanghai that decided, you know what, we'll just cut all of our pieces instead, and we'll figure things out as we go. But all this uncertainty definitely causes some problems and some issues, and so I think there is a level of, we need to take a little bit of time to actually figure this out before we kind of jump in and kind of build a roster, and then these players never actually get the opportunity to play. That would be really bad, and that'd be a really unfortunate thing to see. So those are the types of things I'm going to talk about here, and why I'm going to talk about free agency not being that big of a deal, right? The first thing I want to really talk about, though, is if you think back to this time last year, going into Overwatch 2, we knew the game was going to be very, very different. We knew it was going to be 5v5, and we knew that the tank role was going to look very, very different. A lot of teams were under the impression that in Overwatch 2, you were going to basically run double flex support all the time. You could get away with having one really solid tank player. A lot of teams still ran two tanks, and in a lot of ways, that was kind of a benefit to a lot of your really good top-level teams. But a year ago, people didn't know what to expect with Overwatch 2, and there was still so much uncertainty about the league. Obviously, pandemic and the economy was still not recovering. It was actually getting worse, and it's worse now than it was So that's another factor as well. But there was obviously this big question of, will Overwatch 2 even succeed? Will the game land well? And so a year ago, there was already people who were uncertain about the future of the league, who were uncertain about whether or not the Overwatch League would do well into the future. And so you had a lot of teams that already kind of built cheaper level rosters, you know, a lot of contracts that were signed in 2020 that were going to probably end after the 2022 season. And so a lot of teams didn't renegotiate those contracts. They just kind of let them run their course to end at the end of 2022 so that they could kind of reassess everything. And so I think when you look now and you think about the fact that 2023, we're going into, you know, this was the best grand finals in 2022. This was the most successful playoffs. Like, this was like peak Overwatch League. This is like Overwatch League at its best. That's a really positive thing. Can they continue that going forward? I still think there's a little bit of uncertainty. And in the current economic climate, I think a lot of teams just are going to be a little bit more hesitant to be tied into these pre-existing contracts that they already have, when instead they can release players, renegotiate contracts, and they can take a whole league-wide salary reset. Because I think what we're seeing is that I think salaries just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger year after year. And that kind of ends up inflating some of these salaries. Now, some of those salaries, obviously, may be a little more justified than others. But I think what you see with the Overwatch League is there's a reason why there's always been such high turnover. And it's because veteran salaries have been pretty high, and the rookie talent pool is always pretty much equal to, if not a little bit better or slightly worse than your veteran talent. And so there's always been this really big pool of contenders talent that you could pull from, right? We all know that the O2 Blast roster is going to be one of the biggest things that a lot of teams go after, right? And it's very clear that there's some teams that this year knew that there were going to be really good players in the 2023 free agent pool from contenders, that knew that there was going to be this big league-wide reset, right? Teams know this type of stuff. Players know this type of stuff. There's a reason why all of the American Tornado players signed one-year deals. It was so that they knew in 2023, when everyone's a free agent again, they can kind of leverage themselves to a team that wants to rebuild and say, bring us on. We have, you know, all this contender success. We also have Overwatch League success. You can sign us. We're a low-risk team in the sense that we already have synergy. We've played together. And we've been successful both in the Overwatch League and in contenders, right? So that's a reason why you have things like the American Tornado guys all going presumably to Toronto, because they know that they can get the thing that they want, which is to play together after a year of success in the Overwatch League. It's very clear that the main reason why we're seeing all these kind of free agency moves and shuffles is just because the league is going through a period of kind of readjusting now that we're going into the first real full Overwatch 2 season where the game is released. Teams obviously don't want to spend more money than they need to. They want to kind of know where things are going to stand with the league going forward. They want to know how the financial situation is going to work as we move into a period where the economy is not great and there's still some uncertainty. There's definitely some level of hesitation that is very, very clear and not that surprising and not that big of a deal as we move forward. This is not just an Overwatch League problem. There are other esports that I have seen tons of different reports on that there's just general kind of concerns. League of Legends is a game that has like incredibly high salaries that a lot of people think is not sustainable. The Overwatch League had rosters that were, or had salaries that were not sustainable. And so we're seeing those kind of come down. And I think what we're going to see is we're going to see that the league in general is going to have less money going into player salaries. But we're also seeing sponsors return, of course, when we saw Butterfinger sponsor the Overwatch League. There's a very real possibility that with Overwatch 2 out and as successful as it's been, we could start seeing more and more sponsorships start to show themselves and more companies start to throw their money behind the Overwatch League. And so this was a period where we're watching the Overwatch League in a point of arguably its lowest in terms of its financial situation. but some of the best viewership we've seen in a while, and a fan base that is now rejuvenated because of Overwatch 2. And so as we move into the future, what we're going to see is we're going to see a big market shift. We're going to see a lot of players change teams. But just because a player's a free agent doesn't mean they're not going to get signed. Yes, it always happens. There's always a player or two that you think there's no way this player goes unsigned this free agency period. And then they do. There's always stellar rookie talent out there. There's always a landing place for veterans who people think have no shot at coming back in the league. I was surprised that Animo got re-signed in 2022 by a team. I was surprised when the Florida Mayhem brought him in. He had a really solid year. We're all wrong sometimes. Some of us have the wrong assumption of who's good, who's bad. There's a lot that goes into it that isn't just, player on good team keeps getting signed to other good teams. Sometimes good players are on bad teams, and sometimes players are getting carried by much better teams. And so when they enter the free agency pool, you don't really recognize their shortcomings or their flaws or whatever when they're on this really good team. And then they have a team that's not as good, and you're kind of like, oh, this player doesn't really look as good. So to me, there's not really a lot to kind of be worried about with this free agency period. I'm not surprised there's a lot of free agents. I expected this year in 2022 to be kind of a transitional year where teams spent much less money on players, kind of tried to budget out teams, which would then hopefully lead to a 2023 where they maybe have a little bit more loose change lying around, and they can kind of build a more competitive and a better kind of team. And of course, we're also seeing all these situations with NetEase in China that's going to have a big impact on a lot of things. So there are factors that should be something to be concerned about. The fact that there's a lot of free agents isn't a concern. If you want to be concerned about something, be concerned about NetEase. That is a big deal. That is something that could have major implications in the future of the Overwatch League and could impact the Overwatch League as a whole. So that is something that definitely, if there's anything to be worried about, that is arguably thing number one. But the fact there's a lot of free agents, don't get too worked up about it. Don't get too concerned about it. It will all be fine. The players who are league level will find spots in the league. It is that simple. So this video was a bit ranty, I know, just kind of talking about free agency. If you are interested in more videos like this, you want me to talk more about free agency, usually I wait until we kind of have the rosters before I talk about anything, but we'll see what happens as time goes on. We don't know what the league schedule is, so when we start getting teams, I'll probably start doing those roster breakdowns again once we kind of know what we're getting. But for right now, that is all for today. Let me know your thoughts down below on the free agency pool. Obviously, we've seen, the Atlanta Reign have made some moves, and we've seen teams release a lot of players. So there's still a ton of stuff going on, but I just want to take some time today to kind of do a little rant/ramble about free agency. Well, I don't really think free agency, having a lot of players, is that big of a deal, like some people have been thinking it is. To me, it really doesn't mean all that much. It just means that we're going to see a very different looking Overwatch League next season, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's all for me for today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed, like I said, consider liking and subscribing. And until next time, bye-bye.